All right, welcome back to another Conquest Corner. On this particular episode, we are going to be talking about the two things really. The very brief changes for 100 Kingdoms. And since that's going to take all of about 5 minutes or so, I thought something that would actually be fun to do is we know in January that 100 Kingdoms is getting their revamp. We know it happened right now for Nords and Wadrun. It's happened for some of the armies in the past, and who knows what's coming next. But we do know that they will be in January. One of the things we know they're getting in January is a monster. So the other part of this video, as you kind of tell by the title, is we're going to come up with some stats for it. I have no concept of this. No one tells me anything. But I thought it would be fun since it's not going to take long to talk about the rules. We're going to talk a little bit about maybe some sets for that. And we also might talk about what sort of changes we might see when they do come around in January. I don't know. They talked a little bit about what that may be, and we'll get into some of that as well. All right, keep in mind if you're trying to pick up anything for Conquest, we do have a discount code in the show notes below. It's Train Kickers, saves you 10%, helps us out as well. We do thank everyone who has used it or considers using it, especially because if you're talking 100 Kingdoms, the All Horses box is still available. A local to me actually just picked it up because he was worried that that box might go away. I was worried and kind of happy that it might go away because that might mean I save myself some money, but it's still there, so we have to see. But I have some other projects I'm working on first. So at least for now, the wallet is safe. All right, so 100 Kingdoms got very few changes, and it makes sense. If they're going to do a revamp in January, there's no reason to do tons and tons of work now if there's going to be a lot of alterations then. As we can see with the Nords and Wadrun, they are rather fundamental changes that they did there. For the Nords, to me, they kind of changed what their identity seemed to be. It wasn't what they wanted. And for the Wadrun, they refined what the identity was and essentially gave it out more to the units themselves rather than the army as a whole, so they could get more differentiation. So, a few changes, some pretty basic, but we'll go through these pretty quick. If you haven't watched one of these before, so if you're listening to it, I'll explain it, of course. But if you're watching this, on the left is the new, and on the right is the old. That's why it says old above it. So the first one, not a tiny change to dynastic alliances, so their army rule. You still can take an extra warlord. They shorten the verbiage just to say it's a different character to do it. They no longer explain what same entries mean. So I'm curious off of this. I would say if it's a noble lord, I don't care if he's on a foot or on a horse, that is the same entry. That's the same character. But it would have been nice if they just either left that in or if they said, yeah, the intention is that it's gone, they count as different. But to me, I wouldn't, at least personally. Plus, you don't get some of the good uses of why you would do that anyway. You only get one active supremacy. That's not any different, regardless of how many warlords you have. All that was there. However, if your warlords have always active abilities, they are always active. So it's if both warlords have those abilities, then they are always active. So if your warlords happen to be able to do that, then you always do get your abilities, where in the past, you kind of didn't really. Scrolling down quickly, the reason that's useful, because when you take a look at a lot of them, almost everyone, noble lords is always active, no matter which way, if he's infantry or on foot. Hero officers is always active. Okay, so mounted priority is essentially once. Theist is once. And chapter mage is always active. So if you choose from them, you'll always get your abilities. All right, first change for characters is under the Imperial Officer. He now takes the Steel Legion as a mainstay. So he was always the only one who took Steel Legion. However, it took him as restricted. So you had to at least fill up with two other things to be able to get to your max of 2 Steel Legion for your Imperial Officer. Now they're mainstay. Now, you still can't take more than 2, but that does mean if that's all you wanted, that's all you actually have to end up taking. I do absolutely love things like this because when something switches from your restricted to your mainstay, now you're really opening up the playbook of what you might have taken in your list. Let's say before you're running, I don't know, some militia bowmen or even just men at arms, and you're running that just so you can end up getting to your Steel Legion. Well, now you don't have that extra tax. You don't have the mainstay tax. You can take them as your mainstay. You free up some points, so maybe now you can take some upgrades or an extra stand of something. So anytime they swap that around, I think that's a good change, especially because it's the only character who takes them. So if you're the only one who takes them, give me some choices. All right, the next change, Mounted Priority Commander, he can take an heirloom now. Was not a thing you could do before. But we also know one of the things that they're doing is not so much here, but when they revamp an army, which is coming then in January, so in a couple of short months from now, that they're redoing a lot of the equipment or heirlooms or whatever your faction may call it. So they're giving them this ability, and then they can make sure that nothing gets too crazy. Although they did tack on one thing to make sure that it stays reasonable. And I believe that's actually the next change. Yeah, so let's get to it. So all these are heirlooms. And the one thing they did, which was absolutely necessary, is that for Armor of Dominion, 1 went down by 10 points. Hey, good. Armor of Dominion, I think, is very, very good. For anyone who doesn't realize what Armor of Dominion does, enemy stands that are in contact with that character lose Cleave and Smite. So what they did is they decreased it by 10 points, but they also made infantry characters only. Your prior commander now can take an heirloom, and they didn't want you to put that in your horse units. So they effectively removed the option of that. There was some options related to it before, depending on who you took. I think, actually, no, probably not. Could you have done that previously? No, infantry, mounted, so he got it now, mounted. Yeah, he could have it as well, the mounted noble lord. I thought he did. Just wanted to be sure. But now they're just restricting that entirely, and I think that's a good call. That's a little bit much. But for the prior commander, so what do you actually take then, if you take anything? Just taking a quick thumbing through this. For things that I like on the prior commander, depending on which way you're running them, obviously you can run them in 1 or 2 different units, changes things up a little bit, but either way, he's at 4 impact. Actually, I can pull him up on this because his base stats didn't change. So this way we can showing it at the same time. There we go. Yeah. So he's 4 impact either way, but he's either getting brutal impact 2 and terrifying, or he's getting Quicksilver Strike and impact +1. So I do like a few other upgrades I like. Lauren Lance, being able to let him reroll hit rolls when doing his impact. So he's on a minimum 4 and getting extra brutal, especially if you're taking Sealed Temple. So now you're at 5 dice, re-rolling, and you actually have some brutal impact. On Crimson Tower, not quite as necessary, but still not a bad thing. You can guarantee whoever he hits, he should get his 4 hits, or close to his 4 hits, and they're not getting any, realistically, any saves unless they have evades out of that. You upping your evasion is kind of worthless. Reroll defense rolls, not bad. I do like the Indomitable Plate for 15. +1 to both wounds and defense. So now he's sitting at defense 5. He's sitting on 7 wounds. He is even more of a tank than he was before. I do think that's actually pretty decent. Tenacious is fine. It's only on the character stand, though, so you're looking at them being in challenges. The extra defense, I guess that one actually only really helps in challenges as well, but I don't know. I just kind of like it a little bit more personally. Anything else in particular? Devout, depending on if you're doing a lot of spells. Yeah, those are probably the main ones that I'm kind of taking a look at. Brute Regiment Serial successful defense rolls when resolving hits from a character stand with this character upgrade. The Unwrought isn't bad, especially on your horses, because then your horses can go clamoring down onto someone, and that's at least one stand that had to get some rerolls against. So, good. Not amazing, but good. I like that they just open it up for you, so you have some options. Mercenary Crossbow lost some range. They used to be 18. They're now down to 16. That's fine. The game in general, it seems like they're shortening some ranges because they don't want this sort of alpha strike destroy the thing before it gets to you, which, yeah, I have no problem with that overall. Hunter Cadre got a nice big upgrade because they are now medium, so now they can score and they have flank. So this is your good range, good attack, good cleave, hunting down fiends and all, and now they can actually go and score for you. This was a unit that if you end up seeing them, they ended up wanting to probably be somewhat forward from the force anyway. A little bit easier for them to go and grab you a couple points while they're on their way to go hunt something down, some brutes or monsters. And only one other change. The only other change? Well, one other unit with a change, I should say. Where are they? There they are. Ashen Dawn. It is clear that they've had some issue balancing some of these horses. And Ash and Dawn are probably one of the main, probably the main one for that, I would say. Ash and Dawn before were 250. They're now 260. And they used to be 90 points for an additional stand. That's no longer allowed. You are now 3 stands, only ever 3 stands. I believe they said that the idea was these guys, that's all they would take them in. It's a very particular force. They're taking them for a very special purpose, so they're not just loading them down. Other than that, they also lost an attack. They were 6 attacks. Um, I've played against some 100 Kingdoms. I haven't played against lists wanting to run multiple Ashen Dawns. I'm sure that is a problem. And I forget the big box has multiple of them. I want to say no, but I could be wrong. I don't have it in my mind right now, mostly because I'm trying not to spend a whole bunch of money on a bunch of horses. Not at least while I got a lot of other painting to do. They definitely needed something. I don't know if you capped them if they needed the points increase and the loss of attacks, but I'm not opposed to it. I don't think it's only going to make you say, I'll never take these guys. If you enjoyed them before, I think you still will. I think in any sizes more than 3, I could see how, one, they could become oppressive because they are defense 4 with a shield. So not with a shield, my apologies, with a resolve of 5. And they are blessed. So that means if they just want to survive, they have really good odds of doing that, unless you have a huge cleave, unless you're like a cleave 3 type thing. They themselves are cleave, they have fearless, they have impacts. So I'm absolutely fine with that. I think that that is a good change. I think they were trying to avoid getting overwhelmed by this unit. I think they were working on the idea of NPEs, so negative play experiences. I'm always pro avoiding those, even if it were technically to nerf you. And I'm sure people absolutely love Ashen Dawn. Maybe they're saying, oh, I wish I could still take him this way, that. But it's a good change without doing so much that I think it's ruining for you. I mean, to take 4 stands of it, you were looking at 340 points before. You're putting a lot of eggs into that basket. Now, it's a good basket, but you are putting a lot into it. Now they're capping you. Sitting at 260, you know exactly what you got. And if you want to run more than one, you know exactly what you have that whole time. So it's the only unit where so far they have capped that the regiment can't add additional stands. I'm interested to see in the future if that is something that they continue. I think for these guys, so when we think about what could, so, all right, let's go to this first. What do we think of the overall changes? There's not many. I think everything is a positive for the game. That doesn't mean it's a positive for the army. The Ash and Dawn one is probably a positive for your opponent and your sanity, but your faction is obviously a little bit weaker because they are worse. They are still great, but they're technically worse. Prior commanders being able to take an upgrade, though, is very, very good. Cleaning up that if you have 2 always-on warlord traits, you get both of them. Very good change. Hunter cadre, nice big glow up. And the difference in the range for your crossbows, so be it. That's just the game. That's the price of it. So that does it for the upgrades. Now, as I said, one of the things I wanted to end up doing is, rather than just making this super short. So if all you wanted to talk about was what were the changes, what happened, we've went through that. That's done. What I want to do now, though, is I want to talk a little bit about where I think they might end up going. And this is without me having any sort of inside information. And then I want to do a fun thing. I've actually come up with some stats related to that Archangel. Now, again, I have no idea, and I have concepts of what I think would be cool. Do I think it'll look like that? Probably no. I don't do game design, but I have ideas of what, I don't necessarily want to say the words I would like to see, but what I think would be interesting to see, or what could support this army in a very cool way. What I think we could see, or thoughts just in general related to them. I have a friend who plays 100 Kingdom, so we've discussed the good, the bad, and the otherwise of it, of course. One of the things that always surprises me is effectively their defensive abilities. So when we take a look at their defense and evade, the army pretty much has no evade. There's a little bit here and there. Sakari have it, and I think there's like their evade 2, and I think there's another unit like I had evade 1. Sakari evade 2, something else. Order the Sworder evade 2. There's very little evade. Order St. Lazarus or evade 1. So on certain hunter cadre were evade too. Great. You have a little bit of evade in this army, but you don't really have much in terms of if someone is a heavy hitter, base your units are essentially getting crushed. What I found, at least when, and now maybe this is because of the types of armies I play, I have a good amount of cleave in the forces that I've been doing lately, which means that he's getting very little to if no saves. Like Imperial Ranger Corps, okay, they're the other ones with evade, but it's an evade of one. I would like to see maybe some options of where they have a little bit more or something to help them in terms of defense rather than just some heirloom pieces that, oh, it removes your cleave and smite. Okay, well, that's on one unit. What about all the rest of it? So I'm interested to see that. I know they said, we've been seeing Theus and Dias. They're going to be expanding all of that out. But, for other units, I don't really have any particular ideas. But like I said, I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about maybe what this Archangel could look like. All right, so for this, I have a little bit of a PDF editor, and we are going to be doing this. I actually grabbed this. So you can't quite see it on the screen you're on, but this was from the Sorcerer Kings. I just took one of their monsters and removed everything. Most things. I left some of the stats, and we'll discuss if I want to keep the stats that way. Again, I have no idea anything they're going to do for this. I just want to come up with something that seems fun. Okay, so for this, we're going to keep it at 260. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Don't know if that's actually going to be what happens, but hey, let's leave it there. Why not? So let's do some thoughts on this. And actually, I'd have the other guys on. My hope is to have them on again soon. But again, depending on their schedules, it's easier for me to do some of this stuff on my own. So things that we know. For this Archangel, things that we were told, and again, this could change, but for what we were told, it is essentially parts of a church come to life. I don't know if they give us all the lore behind it, but they said a little bit. I think that's more the feel. It's this sort of walking church, and that's sort of the avenue that I'm going to go with this. This is the last time I remember I could have swore that's what they said, so that's what I want to kind of go with. Yep, I just went back and listened. The design of this is that it's an angel given life in the form of essentially a church. So the prayers of the faithful imbued this holy space, and then this angel manifests itself in whether or not the church was standing at the time or destroyed or something like that. Who knows? I'm sure there'll be a cool story about how Nords sacked a village and burned it down, and then this angel arose from the ashes and smote them or something cool like that. So we are going to play off of that as our main idea. Now, there's a few things we know about this thing if we take a look at it. One thing we know, at least by look, there appears to potentially be two different options. One has a large sword. The other one has almost more of like a spear and shield. So whether or not, at least by that look, that seems like two different sort of loadouts. Let's take a look at it more related to the shield form. So move 7, I think something like that's fair. 6 seems a little bit slow. Much more, I think, would be a bit much for this sort of what I see as a lumbering beast. Volley, why not? Base Clash 3, I think is fine. I could see it going to potentially a 4. But I think 3 getting inspired, because I'm seeing this as a little bit more support, is what I'm seeing. 16 wounds is reasonably standard. I could see it maybe being a little bit more like the Dweg, closer to, say, the 18 or anything like that. I don't foresee it getting to the 20s, at least personally. For attacks, that's one thing you notice I didn't actually put in yet. I'm viewing it, if we're talking about the shield-based one, I'm viewing it as maybe a bit less attack, so maybe sitting on a 12. I could see the one with just a sword being more like the difference in the Rakshasas, so you're looking at 15 or maybe 16 attacks. 16 ones, like I said, I'm fine with. I like the idea of, okay, defense 3 with a shield and resolve. So my thought related to this is seeing this thing, and actually, one thing I will say, I would probably change the evade. It's probably fitting for this faction to have an evade of 0. Oh, sorry, I don't know why. Oh, it turned it in black. That's fine. I'm not too worried about that. But putting a resolve, an evade of 0, not that that's what I want to see, but at the same point, that's kind of like a thing that they've been doing to them. So I could see that. I like the idea of this thing being that it can fight. Gonna give it some cleave and all, but I'm seeing it as much more that it supports the army. And if we're talking about this thing as being the answer to the prayers of the faithful, I'm seeing it as wanting to help all of them. So I'm liking the defense of 3. The resolve of 4, I think is fine. I think it could alter. Um, I could see it. We already know they do some higher resolve things. I'm going to do a little bit different. When we think of special rules, so things it would have, either way, I think it should have a cleave. So I'm going to give it cleave 1. I think the one with just a sword could easily be cleave 2, but otherwise I would see it's cleave 1. We're talking about the one with the shield, so we're going to give him a shield. Now, for other things I want to do, so for other rules, I'm looking at less in terms of its damaging output and more in the fact that it is a building and that is what you're swinging at. So it might not have the highest defense, but I can see it having some other bonuses that will help it survive. I'm going to give it hardened 1. There's nothing vital to hit. Again, I could see it getting a little bit of an evade because of this too. I could see it maybe getting a 2 on evade. Same way the Buckevely have an evade. They have an evade not because they're dancing around, which is what I prefer to think about, but because there's nothing vital to hit. Where are you hitting this thing? Especially if you're not hitting it exceptionally high up, that matters. You know, you're hacking at its legs to hopefully cause it to topple, not to necessarily do really realistic damage to it. So I'm liking this thing set on 4s and 4s, not with an evade, hardened so you do have a better shot at getting your saves. And the other thing I have is if the concept of this thing is that it is the answer to the prayers, I see it as a sort of, you know, not necessarily unstoppable force, maybe that more of like a movable object sort of feel. So I like giving this thing Indomitable. And the reason I like to give it Indomitable, I see it as, your resolve is shaking the faith. So, your battle metal. And here is this thing that is meant to be a centerpiece for its people, is meant to, inspire them and everything like that. So I'm going to give Indomitable. I'm going to give Indomitable 2. I'm going to say if you want to hurt this thing, you are hurting it through defense or good cleave or things like that, that you're not, or getting into its side because it does have a shield. So remember, things in the side doesn't get that bonus. Not that you're getting through it in terms of resolve. Same exact reason why I would think, do I want to actually give it fearless? I could see that as well. So maybe it goes Indomitable 1 fearless. But you'll notice everything that I'm giving it to buff, I'm only giving it one thing that helps in its fight, and that's base cleave 1. The only other thing I would think is it would make sense that has some sort of impact because it is just big. Most monsters do. I could see it as just having like a small amount of impact, say impact 2. I'm not thinking brutal, just because to me it's more of impacting because it's moving at you rather than necessarily trying to damage you. Am I happy with the specials? I mean, you have 260 points, and let's face it, monsters in general get quite a bit, but they don't always have everything that you want. The only other thing I could potentially see it may be having, I don't know if I want to put it on there, is the idea of aura death. Maybe not because of the unholy, but more because of the radiance kind of factor. But I'm going to keep that off for the time being. For a draw event, I do want to give it a draw event. And again, I'm playing up the idea of it is out there to help. I like that maybe it does some healing off of its draw. That just the sight of this thing can, I said, it's an angel. It is actually putting out, it's, I don't know if magic is the right word, but putting that out into these people, that seeing it helps you not only toughen up yourself, but to actually maybe pull on those reserves that you didn't know you have while it is actually literally helping people. So I could see a draw event of, a heal, say 2 in, a 6-inch bubble. I like that as the draw. because then that means that is when it gets to go, when it is, I don't know, channeling its power, however you want to put that. And again, I have no idea if any of this will happen, but I kind of like that as an ability. I think that's kind of neat. For other things that I like for it to do, inspiring presence. Is that what I want to call it? I thought try to think about another name, but I didn't come up with anything too much better. So, inspiring presence or something like that. And here's what I'm thinking for that. I'm thinking that within some range, you get to use its resolve because you see this thing and it is willing you on to do better. So, I don't know, say all regiments in 12 inches. So a giant bubble. And use the Archangels. That way it's doing what you would think an angel would do. Inspires the rest of the forces. I could also see if they do something where maybe instead it gives out a bubble of inspire. So maybe it actually inspires, regiments within a certain distance. But again, I like it a little bit more for that it is protecting you. And this is a way for it to protect you. I could also even see, if we want to really kind of dig into that protection, that it maybe gives Indomitable 1 in a range around it. So you are not necessarily saving better, but you're more fanatical. You're not going to leave because this thing is here. I can also see, so yeah, maybe we'll give it something like that. What could we call something like that? Fine, it's not as easy to type because I have the microphone in front of me, a few other things, so I'm not in the same exact spot I normally sit in, so I keep missing keys. The other thing I think that would be really neat is I'm thinking an ability of, much like the Rakshasa, when it goes down, it does damage to whoever actually takes it out in close combat. That's what I'm thinking it ends up doing. I'm not sure what to call it. Thought of a good name. Sacrilege. Do I think that's enough for those points? Probably no. But what I will say is, so since it's an unreleased piece, I'm comparing this to Profane Sepulchre. Profane Sepulchre doesn't do much itself, but it has a lot of things it does around. And that's what I'm seeing for this thing. It is meant to be very tanky. It is meant to support your people. Yes, it can attack. It's 12 attacks with cleave 1. So it can definitely do some damage. I could see it being terrifying 1. Actually, a walking church could be very scary. I could see that. Striking fear into people. But it doesn't necessarily do crazy amounts itself. And it wants to be in the middle of it. You're not going to be sending this thing out to a flank and doing its own thing. Maybe the one with the sword. Instead, I'd probably give it cleave 2. I'd probably give it 3 more attacks or so. I would lose the shield, obviously, so it would be a little bit worse in terms of defense. I think everything else probably could stay. Maybe what you do instead for the one that fights, instead, maybe it gives... Actually thinking about it, Fight Through the Pain might be a weird name for the fact of giving them Indomitable, because that's saving you in terms of morale. But that's kind of what I like the look of. I don't know if that is the best name. And again, if we come up with a better name, that's fine as well. But that's the kind of just the way that I'm enjoying its name or thinking about it in terms of that. But I could see that one maybe giving inspired in a region. I could see even this thing giving inspired in a small bubble. That's not something I put down to it, but I could absolutely see if it's deemed that isn't enough. That's a very quick and easy thing to give it. I do like the idea of that it aids people's resolve, because that makes a lot of sense, or helps with resolve type things like Indomitable. Beyond that, so that's my sort of thoughts on this. Let me know what you think. What would you give this thing? If you're a 100 Kingdoms player, what do you hope this monster does? What do you think your army is missing that this thing could add? And what's something that you don't want it to do maybe as well, rather than just the things that you like? What's something you don't want to see? What's something you hope that doesn't occur? All right, well, that does it for this. The last part, I don't know if that's of interest to anyone, but I kind of wanted to sit down and come up with some concepts. So there's a bunch of pauses in there while I thought about things. But I like that idea. I'm not a game designer in any way. And let's face it, you need to test things out and really go through that. But I just like the idea of trying to figure out what some of these things are. I'm better at looking at what people have done and analyzing it than come up myself, but that was a fun little thing. And otherwise, there's not much to talk about for 100 Kingdoms currently. If you're a 100 Kingdoms player, what do you think is going to happen when they give you your big updates? What are the things you think you're getting? What big changes do you want to see? I know the subreddit, sorry, not subreddit, well, that too, for Conquest, but also the Discord channel for 100 Kingdoms. All those channels are always alight with the ideas of what could happen. So I'm curious to see what you think. All right. Well, if you want to pick up anything for Conquest, remember we got that discount code in the show notes. Save yourself 10%, helps us out as well, and keeps the lights running, which hopefully you notice this video is much lighter than the last one. Turns out my settings in OBS were all kinds of messed up, especially because I don't have all the lights on around. But it's much better now than it was. All right. Well, on behalf of everyone at the show then, have some good hobbying and some great gaming.